The Sherman versus the Panzers. How did the Sherman compare to Panzer tanks? Which would win in a face-to-face encounter? Why was the Tiger tank feared by the Allies? Sherman M4 Allies. The Sherman tank was one of the best-known tanks of World War II. It was designed to be mass-produced, reliable, easy and cheap to build. Production of the Sherman began in February 1942 and incorporated a fully rotating turret and a cast hull and front. In December 1943, the Sherman was upgraded with a 76mm gun with a higher muzzle velocity capable of piercing 100mm of armour. The Sherman was developed for infantry support and not for tank-to-tank combat. Number built, 49,234, 3 times the number of German heavy tanks. Weight, 30 tons. Maximum speed, 25 miles per hour. Operational range, 100 miles. Main armament, M3 75mm gun. Armour, front, 75mm, rear, 50mm. Panzer IV, German. Panzer meaning armour is shortened from Panzer Kampfwagen, armoured combat vehicle. The Panzer IV had been progressively upgraded with bigger guns and thicker armour. The most noticeable difference are the numbers produced, with 49,234 Shermans compared with 8,500 Panzer IVs. The Sherman was heavier than the Panzer IV. The Sherman's armour was slightly thinner in the front but thicker on the rear. Both had 75mm main guns. The Sherman M4 and the Panzer IV compared favourably with each other. The Panther, German. The Panther, after the Tiger, was considered one of the best tanks of World War II. Its 75mm gun, depending on type of shell, could penetrate up to 139mm of armour at 1,000 metres, which means it could penetrate the front armour of a Sherman. It did, however, have its problems. Its turret was slow to turn. It was unreliable and prone to breakdown. More Panthers were lost to mechanical breakdown than to enemy action. The weakest point was the final drive, which could fail after a life of only 150 kilometres. The Panther was more than 15 tons heavier than the Sherman. The Panther's front armour was 110mm compared with the Sherman's 75mm. And although they both had 75mm main guns, the Panther had a better long-barrelled high-velocity gun. With its thick armour and high-velocity gun, the Panther could knock out a Sherman from a great distance, while the Sherman's shells would bounce off the Panther's front armour. The Tiger, German. The German Tiger tank was one of the most feared tanks of World War II. Its 88mm gun could pierce all Allied tank armour. It could destroy Allied tanks from over 1.5 miles away, well out of range of their guns. Shells fired from most Allied tanks bounced off its armour. The Tiger II's engine was underpowered for its weight. It was prone to mechanical breakdown and difficult to repair. Its weight meant it bogged down easily and could not cross smaller bridges. The Tiger needed to be moved on trains, but its tracks were too wide and needed replacing when transported by train. The Tiger tank could endure serious punishment. Tiger Tank 231 on the Eastern Front was hit 252 times by anti-tank weapons, but still managed to withdraw from the battle under its own power. The Tiger was more than twice the weight of a Sherman, its armour twice as thick. The Tiger's gun was much bigger, 88mm, while the Sherman's was only 75mm. A Sherman could not engage a Tiger head-on. When a Sherman tank crew sighted a Tiger, they radioed the position to the artillery and exited the area. Destroying Tiger tanks was the job of the artillery, rocket-firing Typhoons and the Sherman Firefly. The Sherman Firefly, Allies. There was a Sherman tank which could knock out Panther and Tiger tanks. This was the Sherman Firefly. The British modified the Sherman by adding a 17-pound anti-tank gun which was able to penetrate Tiger armour. On May 31st, 1944, only 6 days before D-Day, 342 Sherman Firefly tanks were delivered to Montgomery's 21st Army Group. Recognised by its longer barrel, Sherman Fireflies were the first tanks to be taken out by the enemy. Shortly after the D-Day landings, the Germans counter-attacked with 60 Panzer IVs. Such an attack had been foreseen. The Sherman Firefly tanks were waiting. 13 Panzers were knocked out in quick succession, and the 21st Panzer Division withdrew rapidly. 5 days after D-Day at Langevre, Sergeant Wilf Harris and his crew knocked out 5 Tigers with only 5 shots. Only 2,150 Fireflies built, the first arriving just in time for D-Day. Extra armour to the front of the turret, but not enough to stop the shell from a Tiger. QF 17-pounder gun which could penetrate Tiger armour. The Sherman M4 A3 E8, the Easy 8. Although not available on D-Day, there was another Sherman which could knock out the Panther and Tiger tanks. This was the Sherman M4 A3 E8, or Easy 8 as it was called by its crews. It had a wider track, 23 instead of 16 inches wide, and thicker armour. Delivered to Europe 22nd of September 1944, it was too late for D-Day but saw combat at the Battle of the Bulge. Arriving towards the end of the war, there were only 254 made. The weight of the extra armour required a new gearbox. This reduced the speed to 22 miles an hour. It was armed with a 76mm M1 high-velocity long-barreled cannon capable of penetrating a Tiger tank's armour. The early Sherman IVs were no match for the German Panther or Tiger tanks. But the British adapted Sherman Firefly and the American-built Easy 8 Sherman, although they had thinner armour, their guns could knock out any enemy tank. The success of the Sherman was in the large numbers produced, their ease of manufacture and their reliability. We will remember them. Please subscribe, it will help produce more World War II videos.